Fred decides to check Zhang's pulse and understands perfectly what was happening. She ends up being a little surprised by our protagonist managing to do these things. Soon after, Fred says that it will probably hurt a little the process there, to be able to remove the poison from her. She feels a little intense pain, only at that moment someone ends up getting up behind him and takes a gun with his hand, saying that he would end Frederico's life right there. However, Fred looks back extremely irritated. He uses his intense power to attack that guy. The crazy guy's weapon starts to get with a bad function and so ends up falling out of his hand. The guy asks himself, what did Frederico do? And his hands were no longer on his control. Fred says that he did what should have done a little earlier, and now the guy's hands were completely desynchronized with his body. Soon after, he ran away in that place, saying that the guy's family could make that come back to normal. The seventh sister tells Frederico that he was running away, but Fred warns that he has to help at that moment. The crazy guy already looks back smiling, saying that he will manage to escape, but soon he takes a punch in the face with everything, and so he falls on the floor a little confused. Then he looks up to see who was there, and it was the father of that child who was in the hospital Yuning. He was there fallen on the floor, and now he didn't understand what he should do, but Gustavo gets up with everything and starts giving several punches in the face of this shameless guy. The seventh sister, she asks Frederico who that guy was. So Frederico presents Gustavo and says that he is a security guard. He gets very excited to present this guy, and soon the seventh sister asks if it was a disciple of our hero. Scared, he says no, and then Gustavo approaches Juninho, and all hurt in the middle there was another woman, and she ends up falling on the floor too. The seventh sister realizes that that was her private driver, and takes the opportunity to say that she was forced to do all that. She said that she didn't want to do it, but she ended up doing it because she was afraid, and still they keep begging for forgiveness. However, Jiang asks why she did that, and if she didn't trust the seventh sister, that she could be able to protect her. The driver bar assistant, she decides to tell the whole truth, and she said that she would be helped if she betrayed the seventh sister, and that they also promised her that they would not hurt Jiang. They would only kidnap her, and ask for an amount of money in return. Juninho, he gets up and talks with that woman there. Obviously she was blind and naive, and that they did that obviously to hurt everyone. The driver gets confused and asks why he was doing that with Jiang. In fact, they were doing that because Juninho says that he thought that everyone were traitors. The driver gets up saying that she would avenge her sister, so everyone starts to hit him and Juninho without stopping. Frederico, he ends up thanking Gustavo for everything that he did at that moment, until a day passes, and someone ends up receiving a newspaper. It was the chief of the Zhang family, and he asked what happened in the newspaper at that time. So the guy hands the newspaper, which was the eldest son of the family, and says that they can't protect that guy. The chief of the family then gets up completely irritated, saying to find the person who would be hurting his brothers, and to make that person pay for everything that he did. So the eldest son hands a photo of a cut hand and says that he managed to cut the meridians. The chief asks how that guy managed to do that, but it was time to stop with all this and find who was messing with the Zhang family. The eldest son says that he would do everything to find this so-called Frederico, but that would be a little complicated at the moment. So soon the chief of the family asked to warn everyone. The news was that the eldest son would be there to help everyone in the martial arts. The chief of the family, he starts to leave completely irritated. The staff is quite loose guys. They want to do evil with everyone. But when someone responds to the height, they get her all pistolinas. The crazy guy already looked straight at the window, saying that he wanted to fight against everyone who fought against his family. So he asked to separate a staff there to search for Frederico. The scene passes, and we see the scene of a quite elegant place. A huge house where the owner was received Diana. She was there accompanied by our hero at that unusual moment. Fred, he comments that this was the right address that he had received there on his cell phone, and they had also arrived at the exact time. However, someone ends up calling attention to Frederico, and he gets completely scared. Soon after, the guards ask him to put his face there to do the facial recognition. Fred only answers that he was there because he knew someone, but it is that he should do the facial recognition first. But he was not understanding what that was. He asks if this will cause some problems there for his meridians, and Diana soon realizes that our protagonist really was a complete madman who didn't know anything about technology. The guards tell him to leave soon from there. If he doesn't manage to do this facial recognition, he should bark out, but someone approaches saying to let them enter. The guards get confused with who could have appeared, and it was exactly the seventh sister, Jiang, who was there. He was a little scared and said that everything was fine, trying to give a disguise. Soon they run quickly to release the gates. Diana talks about the protagonist's seventh sister, and comment a little there about her being very beautiful. The seventh sister asks Diana if she's the one who will share the room there with her. The girl gets a little embarrassed and confused to answer this question until Jiang realizes that the psyche of that woman was not so interesting. So she starts to approach and soon after holds Diana's hand thanking. She also says that she was welcome in that place, could feel at home. Diana continued confused and didn't know what to do at that moment. Our protagonist gets a little embarrassed with the cheeks flushed, and soon they proceed entering the house. You already know what they're gonna do, right guys? It is the so-called double cultivation. So the seventh sister and Diana say that they need to do that to Jiang. She comments that she is also being forced, but she holds on Diana's face saying that they would proceed to the first step. The seventh sister approaches closer and closer to the face of our little Diana, and the girl ends up trying to accept that in the best way possible. Well, our protagonist, he says that He was going to leave the room at that moment, since it was being a little embarrassing. I am absolutely sure that you would stay inside the room to watch everything, and in this way the girls end up kissing. Federico stays there outside thinking about the things that could be happening. The guy was a true shameless. He even keeps commenting that he will do everything to resist the pressure and not give a peek. Because of this, he decides to train a little to try to think of something else. And so in the middle of his meditation, he realizes that something was happening. Someone had appeared in front of him while a sword was flying in his direction, and it was precisely Alice. Perhaps this may be just a false illusion, and not a representation of the future. The seventh sister, she leaves the room saying that they finished with the cultivation and that now she would take a bath and then sleep to rest. Fred kept thinking about the things that had happened in that room, and so Diana decides that she would also take a bath together. Federico gets crazy there, trying to understand if he heard correctly. A little later they will eat, and Diana says that it was very fun on our main character. And he even gets a little jealous guys, saying that they are very close, and that they are very friendly for his taste. Diana says that he doesn't understand that this is a woman thing, and Fred ends up trying to accept all that. At that moment, someone ends up calling him. As soon as he answers, someone says on the other side of the line that he needed to talk urgently with our hero. The protagonist warns that he was eating and could not be now, but the person says that it was about the Zhang family, and this would cause problems for our main character. Fred decided to run to the place where Tuk-Tu was mentioned, and so he stays looking around to find someone. Alice was there and decided to call his attention soon. Our protagonist asks what happened. The girl questions if it was he who was solving the situations with the member of the Zhang family, and Fred remembers the incident that was happening. She says that something was recorded there that was shown to the chief of their family. The crazy guys there cause a confusion and then get pistols wanting to charge the justice of others. I tell you, these guys there are very loose. The protagonist says that a revenge would probably happen, and Alice explains that that was not something so simple, since their family was complicated and powerful, and that actually a widespread fight between the families could happen. Alice continues explaining that that could cause problems for many people. However, Federico says that they're masters in martial arts and everything would be fine, and that even he would be able to resolve the matter. However, someone ends up entering in the middle of the conversation. Federico and Alice ask themselves, who could it be? And here he was, the guardian of the Zhang family, Rodolfo. Alice knew Rodolfo once he already went to the banquet of the families. He was very clever and powerful, and was also known as one of the people who destroyed the Black Organization. Soon the protagonist asks if he was there to do a revenge of the family. Rodolfo asks what else he would do, so he starts using his aura, and also his power. He advances to give a punch with everything on them, saying that our protagonist hurt one of his brothers. However, Federico would not let this so simple, and ends up holding his punch as if it was nothing. Rodolfo continued saying that it was very strange our protagonist having so much power like that, and it advances to try to give another punch in the face of our hero. At that exact moment, the protagonist managed to dodge the punch, and so Fred explains that everything would end there, right there. He didn't have time to lose with this Zhang family. Rodolfo was not going to let things so simple like that. So he advances again, and this ends up making our protagonist defend the attack and counter-attacking with everything there. Alice didn't understand what she should do at that moment. She was just watching the fight happening before her eyes and ends up getting quite nervous. She decides to ask if she could help our protagonist in some way, but obviously seeing that intense fight, she would not be able to do anything that could be useful. The two advance on top of each other without thinking twice, and Fred ends up defending the attacks. Soon after he advances on top again, however, Rodolfo he ends up defending. The fight was quite fierce, and our protagonist ends up being thrown far away. Rodolfo realizes that that kid, he has a very intense force. And our main character, he realizes that his arm also was not very well. And if Rodolfo wanted to really start a fight, he should take that even more seriously, otherwise he would lose. Rodolfo stays making an evil face there, and so he undoes his pose, saying that that was all for today, and that in the future they would meet again Alice. She asks if he would do something bad again, and Federico realizes that this guy only came there to test his strength. The guy asks if our protagonist was hiding some kind of card there up his sleeve, and obviously our protagonist had not demonstrated all his power, and he makes this very clear for this guy Alice. She doesn't understand very well what our protagonist was talking about, only that her cell phone ends up ringing and it was someone sending a message for him. It was Gustavo, and he says that his daughter had already woken up, so he decided to show a photo, and both get very happy at that moment. He says that the protagonist's arts are very good, and that they saved the life of his little daughter. Only that in the middle there of the live call, someone ends up entering and trying to take the little girl Fred. Seeing that scene, he gets extremely irritated, and soon after another video is sent for him. He decided to open that video soon after, and it was the eldest brother of the Zhang family. This there was the Boladao guy, and his name was Carlos. He tells Federico that he has 3 more days to appear at their house on the mountain. The protagonist realizes that something was very strange, and Alice says that the mountain was very distant from the city. However, our hero, he would not let that his friend and his little daughter were caught like that. Alice tells our protagonist to ask for help for her grandfather, since her family was also quite powerful, and could help. However, Fred, he was not going to accept this so easily. Obviously, she says that her grandfather could do everything for the family, and so our protagonist realizes that Alice could become his disciple in the future. so he takes advantage of this moment to accept her help. And so we go until the Yu family. Our protagonist realizes that inside everything seemed to be an imperial palace. Her grandfather ends up approaching and asks what are the problems that our hero had caused, and that everything that he did was nothing simple. He sits next to the protagonist and says that they could not do much to help him. The Zheng family was very strong. Besides everything, it was very cruel. If the protagonist moved against this family, he was probably causing the end of his own life. Fred asks if they were so powerful like that for everyone to feel afraid of them. So he thinks that he should meditate a little on the conditions. The grandfather there says that there was not much that he could do against the Zheng family, and that from now on he should demonstrate all the achievements that he did. Frederico, he stays trying to convince the girl's grandfather, saying that he has already saved his granddaughter several times. The grandfather, he had already recognized all this kind of thing, but he says there that he could not even help our main character, since it would be very difficult. The girl asks how he could do this kind of thing, but Frederico thanks for all the kindness of the grandfather and for letting all this kind of thing pass. Basically, our protagonist was causing problems there for the Yu family, kind of unintentionally, right guys? He was only giving a lesson in these loose guys, and ended up generating a war between the families. Alice, she doesn't understand very well what Frederico was talking about, but soon after they leave, and she thinks that her grandfather's plan was very good. It was not told there for us what they had planned, but they had a card up their sleeve. Soon she says that the family would be providing the support for Fred, and he realized all this, and was thanking. However, there was more things that he could do at that exact moment. At that time, he thinks a lot about the operation, and realizes that Alice was a key figure. Soon she tells our protagonist, really, that he has a very open mind, and wanted to send him to that place first. So they stop in front of the intense gate. There was our protagonist's exit, so he gives a goodbye to Alice. Was starting the rescue mission of Gustavo and his little daughter, and also the mission to fix this Zhang family of Lucifer Hell. At the time of saying goodbye, she ends up saying something very low, and he can't understand very well. Soon after, he says that people don't trust her very much, but that he believes in the girl 100%, and ends up thanking for all the help that she has given, so he leaves that place. Alice, she asks herself what is wrong with her, so she gives 2 slaps on her face, saying that she has never really found someone who had so much interest in her as he has. Alice was in love, guys. Our protagonist had gone to the mountain house of that rival family. There they were playing cards and making bets. So the eldest son, and Carlos, he introduces himself and tells everyone to open the door as fast as possible. The guards, they approach to open the doors, so he enters cautiously. While in the room, there was someone handcuffed. It was Gustavo, who was there not understanding what was happening. Soon the guy stayed ordering for Gustavo to wake up and still ends up throwing a bucket of cold water on him. The guy asks if he was well. Of course I am well. Yes, I was kidnapped, beaten, and I am well. Gustavo gets angry and shouts for Carlos that he should end his life, but he was also worried about his little daughter and asks where she was. However, Carlos, he simply doesn't answer anything and stays mocking there of the father. He says that Gustavo was a dog and that he should not stay barking. Carlos reveals that the little girl now is part of the Zhang family, and that it will be much better to stay with them, and ends up taking the cell phone and shows something to the father. His daughter was guarded together with 2 wolves, completely fierce. Gustavo already gets completely irritated to see that his daughter was in danger. I tell you that this family Zange there is worth nothing, guys. The chain that was holding Gustavo was almost breaking of how furious the guy was like that. The guy decides that it was time to give him an injection. 2 injections fly in Gustavo's chest, and the guy starts to lose consciousness until he almost falls on the floor. It is like this, Carlos decided to take the cell phone and realizes that our protagonist was arriving at the place. He asked the guards to receive the protagonist very well, and Gustavo had listened to this, so he ends up thinking about our protagonist a little, since he would be there to rescue him. Our protagonist sees that his friend was there hurt, and ends up shouting the name of that shameless Carlos. He warns that he arrived at the place as requested, and soon after all the guards try to advance on top of our hero, everyone runs to try to catch our main character because they had been ordered to do that. However, Federico, he was not going to let this so simple, so he goes soon and holds on the shoulder of one of them, and so he runs to near another. Quickly, he manages to eliminate several guards, and Carlos, who was in the room only waiting for the whole situation, he's received by a guard who warns everything. The chief of the family was there too, and says that they need to end our protagonist as fast as possible. But another one of them says that it was not necessary to do all this, and that there was a test for our protagonist outside the house. Fred was finishing with everyone of a single time, and so he starts to walk forward completely. The crazy guy was 2 good guys. He could take their more or less 5,000 soldier that would not be able to defeat our dear protagonist. The staff even starts to get out of the front. They were dying of fear of the boy, and Fred, he had something to solve in that place, and he remembers very well the face of the person who was the chief of the Zhang family. Because of this, he prepares his punch to break with the whole wall, and after hitting that concrete wall, everyone starts to get scared. The people who were on the other side even run with fear, and after knocking down that wall, Federico prepares, saying that now everything would start there, and he soon prepares to leave running after the crazy guys. However, other guards appear in front of our protagonist, saying that they will end with him. Scared, they didn't understand very well what they should do at that moment, but Federico says that he would talk with the chief of the family as early as possible. The chief of the guard says that that territory was known by boxing, and that all of them would give a beating in our main character. I doubt it very much, but alright, right? The chief also warns that Frederico, he is a little arrogant. But Fred didn't have much time to talk. In fact, he was very irritated so quickly he moves in front of the chief of the guards, and so he prepares giving a punch with everything in the face of the chief and asks if the others are prepared to take a beating too. However, they were more than prepared, and so all advance on top of our main character. Frederico ends up putting the headphones to receive a call, and so he says besides the call that he arrived at the combined place Alice and the staff, who were on the other side of the line. They were prepared to enter into combat. When our protagonist gave the signal as everything was going, according to the plan, he decides to warn Alice that everything was fine. This was the plan that Mr. Yu had planned with Fred. It is clear that the Yu family was not going to be offended like that, and let these guys there get away unpunished. So she warns the other guards to advance all together. Meanwhile, in another place inside the house, there was Alice's grandfather who was completely nervous. He didn't even understand why she wanted so much to go to that place together with Frederico. So we go back a little in time when she had prepared and told the real reason. The grandfather, he gets worried about her going to such a dangerous place like that, but she looks carefully at her grandfather. She didn't know how to explain if it was because of Fred or not. In fact, she was super in love, but she didn't want to admit. Soon we go back to the real time where someone had approached to talk with her grandfather. The grandfather asks the guard what he was thinking of all this plan. The guard says that it is important for the family to do everything possible to help Frederico, and the grandfather keeps asking if this guy really thinks that, if by chance they should help Frederico or not. It is clear that he had to help right guys. Our main character, he only got involved in this mess there trying to help Alice. Soon after, the guard asks about who should marry his granddaughter. The grandfather says that he doesn't know how he would proceed with this marriage matter, but doing a battle with the other family was too complicated and would only worsen things. The grandfather says that the situation would not be resolved so easily, and soon we go back to the scene with our protagonist who is hitting everyone. He lifts one of the guards and asks where the hostage was, but the guard didn't know, so our protagonist throws him to the ground with everything, and he keeps thinking where would the family hide the hostages. He was quite worried about the little girl and her father, so he decides to break another door to enter the place. But after he tries to touch the door, he realizes that it was already open. It is like this. He ends up opening one of them and is well received by people who were with shields, batons, weapons, everything pointed to his direction. Very receptive, these people. The eldest son of the Zan family, and he was soon behind saying that it was good to meet our protagonist in a place like that. He still says that our protagonist is very courageous for having gone there with empty hands. Irritated Fred ends up holding his own fist, and he calls Carlos by the name, saying that he was completely irritated with him and still says that the guy is a coward. Carlos in turn knew that he was irritating our main character, so he starts to laugh a little. At that moment, the guy says that it was to end our hero's life, and that it was cool to see all that from that angle very close. So the guards prepare to start shooting one after the other. But Fred, he managed to do somersaults and dodge all the shots. Soon after, he looks back to verify what was happening. He had fled a little and apologized for his masters, since a warrior should never flee from a combat. At that moment, he breathes deeply, trying to channel his energy. So he continues dodging all the attacks. Frederico prepares to do one of his plans, and so he starts to hit his powers and all the guards who are armed. And he does this with his needles one after the other. He starts to take out and the staff goes falling on the floor, until proceeding with this they ask what the hell was happening. The guy's arm was horrible and the body was not responding right. Everything thanks to those magic needles. After some fall they realized that their arms were not working. It was as if our protagonist had turned off the neural connection between the arms and the brains. Carlos, he gets scared. He starts to say that it was to end the protagonist as fast as possible. The guy was already starting to get worried, guys. And if you like Frederico making some little villains there die of fear, already leave a like and a comment there asking for the next part. He looks to the side, saying for the others to enter the battlefield. The ones who are in reserve start to prepare to enter there in the field, and our protagonist realizes all this. So they start to arrive one by one, and our protagonist gets cornered. Soon after, everyone prepares their weapons and start to give several shots. For the power of our main character, that was too insane, and the bullets were flying all in his direction. However, for some reason, our protagonist managed to change the direction of the bullets. Guys, here it is already turning Matrix, and he makes all those soldiers be hit. For who thought that our protagonist only had the power Zinyo of the needle was very mistaken. Frederico. He was behind the door only watching everything. While the guards, they start to fall one after the other without stopping course, he gets extremely scared, and with the pants blurred. He didn't know what he would do now, so he asked for everyone to withdraw from that place as fast as possible. However, our protagonist was already behind them asking where they think they were going course. He didn't understand why Frederico was so fast like that, and it seemed that he always had a card up his sleeve. But soon he held a little of his needles and demonstrated all this for them. He throws the needles one after the other, and that guy there, Carlos, he starts to get completely scared. However, the woman who was his assistant, she takes a little knife and manages to dodge all the needles. That guy was very chicken, guys. And the woman stays, telling her master to leave, that she will buy time. Carlos, he puts the foot and leaves running, saying that he would leave everything in the hands of his assistant. Frederico realized that that girl was quite skilled, so she tells our hero not to stay so full of himself because she herself would fix him. She says this and still says that today will be the end of his life. After she tells this joke, Someone ends up hitting the door with everything. Alice entered with her guards and asked herself where the staff should be. Soon one of the guards ends up feeling that a fight was very close there to them, and Alice gets scared with what was being there existed a child who was caged. Guys, it was like Gustavo's little daughter, and that scene ended up scaring Alice quite a lot. She got a little traumatized that they should proceed to save that child, and Alice, so she runs to save the little girl. As soon as she arrives, she holds the girl. The poor little thing was completely scared and didn't know what to do. However, Alice, she says that it was not necessary to stay in shock that way, and the child starts to cry. So she runs with the little child in her hands, and the chief of the family realizes that there exists a strange movement in the place, and he orders here the staff should take care of that. The swordsman master of the family says that they have a very high opponent in the middle of the field, until someone arrives in the room completely scared. At that moment it was Carlos, and he didn't understand what was happening, but he tells his father that they lost in that part of the garden there from the front, and they took a beating. And Merida, the chief of the family, asks him to calm down and explains everything right. Soon they warn that there is no way to stop Federico. Meanwhile, Alice was running faster than she could. A swordswoman was approaching, saying that she would stop. At that moment, the guards point all their weapons at that guy, and as many people appear, it was a lot of extra money that he would earn. The guy was a mercenary. The guards ask who that guy was, while some were already shooting, but the gentleman, he was not even caring, and holds his eyes, and so his sword ends up crossing the people. The guards take advantage to shoot at the same time, but at that moment his shadow ends up disappearing and appears in front of Alice, asking where she was going. The gentleman ends up laughing at that situation, and soon he appears again behind her. The girl looks back confused with what could be happening, and so we go inside a house. It was the seventh sister who was worried about all that. Soon Diana, she appears there in the room, and the seventh sister asks how she was there. Diana gets confused and asks if she was waiting for someone. After that, she says that our protagonist agreed to save her, but because of this, he's fighting against the Jang family. In this meantime, she got very worried about our main character, since he would be facing a family that was extremely powerful in Diana. She approaches and puts a jacket on her shoulder, saying that it will be alright. I saw that there was a staff who didn't like very much the climate between the two. I am already from the team that found it a little cool. So comment there, what are you thinking? You shipped the seventh sister with Diana, the seventh sister Jang. She thanks, saying that she was still worried, but at that moment they didn't know for sure what to do, and soon after she looks to the sky, asking for our protagonist to come back and invites. She says that when she was younger, she taught our protagonist some techniques in the mountains when they were little, had some techniques that were the first that they learned, and because of this, she managed to become one of the seven sisters. However, at that moment, she got very worried about Fred, and mainly by the fact of her not managing to use abilities to help him in some way. For who didn't understand, she is sick, guys, so she can't use her cultivation skills. That's why she seems a little weak. But actually, it is that she is sick, really. Among all the sisters, she is the most unlucky of the seventh sister. She got a quite rare disease, of which makes it impossible for her to use her powers, and also consumes part of her life. Whenever she tried to use her skills, something horrible happened and she felt very bad. However, that horrible family was taking everything that was hers, and Diana realized that a red liquid was coming out of Jung. She explains that our protagonist, he left the mountain and came to her to help her, but if something happens with him, she will blame herself for the rest of her life. At that moment, someone appears asking what would happen. This was the sixth sister, guys. Julia, and this here is one of my favorites, guys. Seventh sister got confused, but she was happy because Julia was there. Julia asks what she was thinking of doing at that moment, and it seemed that Jung would use her remaining energy to help our main character. And finally she would end up, let's say, disliving. And she explains this, saying that she would use the rest of her energy to help Federico. Julia, so she ends up moving away a little and still says that they are not connecting with each other. Diana, she was not understanding anything, guys, and asks who was that girl who simply appeared there in the room. The seventh sister only looks at her without explaining the situation right. Soon after, she continues talking with Julia that it was her mistake for not having done so much connection like that, and soon Julia says that she cares a lot about the family and that's why she appeared there. She didn't like the situation, Tyver the seventh sister begging there for the people to save the little brother, but even so, Jiang, she kneels on the floor and begs for the sixth sister to help Fred. Everyone gets surprised with this scene, and the seventh sister, she continues asking for Julia to save the protagonist as soon as possible. The sixth sister, she stays quiet at that moment, and her shadow starts to disappear at that time. Jung, she didn't understand very well what was being done, and Julia had teleported, saying that she will get the protagonist back first, and then she will talk about other more important matters. Soon after, she teleports again. Diana smiles, saying that our protagonist's family is quite complicated. However, soon the seventh sister starts to get very bad. Diana, she doesn't understand right what was happening, but she knew that Jung's health there was getting complicated. Jung, she still says that everything was fine, even so, and that it was time to continue what they were doing. The scene goes back to Federico's fight, who is watching all that. The woman asks to let her leave, and our protagonist says that he will give 3 hours for her to leave that place. Meanwhile, he goes to the next gate because it was time to do the decisive battle. Gustavo and his daughter should wait for the protagonist at that moment while he enters through the gate. When he entered, 2 people were in the front waiting for him, and they say that they recognized each other again. Soon our protagonist asks where his friends are. Rodolfo answers that he will only let him discover by himself. the shameless guy starts to make fun of our main character. So the two end up advancing one on top of the other, our main character. He ends up dodging the blows, and when Rodolfo tries to attack, he watches that blow perfectly. And so another person who was there on the side says that he would not let get away so cheap. But anyway, our protagonist, he defends from the two attacks. The battle starts to get more and more intense, and our protagonist realizes that if he lets Rodolfo and this other guy attack at the same time, it will be too complicated. So our main character, he advances on top of Rodolfo, trying to end with him first, however. Arthur, who is the other crazy guy there, he was not going to let this so easy, and advances soon after, on top of the main character. Because of the situation, Federico, he should defend the two attacks, and it is the same that he does. At the same time, he throws two needles in the direction of one of the people, and that ends up paralyzing Arthur for a time. So he could focus his fight against Rodolfo. In this way, he advances, saying that this will be a fight that he will take seriously. The crazy guy had not taken any fight seriously yet, guys. He had already beaten everyone, this shameless scoundrel. Arthur, he was recovering all his consciousness, while his friend Rodolfo, he advanced on top of our hero. He advances without pain and without mercy, and when watching Fred in that way, he starts to laugh. However, at that moment, someone ends up stopping their fight. It was the swordsman who had captured Alice, and he wanted to use that against our main character, doing there a certain blackmail. Because of this, Federico shouted for Alice's name. Only that the girl, she apologizes for not having held that man and having been captured. Fred tells her not to worry and that she was very useful. Soon Swordsman asks for everyone to watch that scene, and so he holds his sword while throwing little girl on top of Rodolfo. The guy holds the child, and soon our protagonist gets irritated and asks to release at that time. At that same instant, however, Swordsman, he advances with everything on top of the protagonist, and he dodges one of his attacks, but another ends up exploding right next to him. He realized that that man was no joke, guys. He was quite powerful, and the staff there even starts to get scared, because the guy really was very strong. His sword was powerful and moved quickly. Our protagonist ends up saying for them to advance one on top of the other as fast as possible, and so our protagonist's fist collides with the tip of the sword, throwing them back, and after this, people start to get scared and get shocked, but our protagonist's red eyes end up scaring the staff even more. The Pattison advances, saying that he would end our main character's life, so they end up fighting one against the other in a quite fast way, and Federico advances without stopping. He realizes that those swordsmen had something quite intense, so he puts his hand on his own chest and ends up using his power. The swordsman says that it was useless for him to do all that to try to protect himself, but he didn't understand. Our protagonist held his sword without thinking twice, as if it was something easy, and the as that an explosion ended up happening because of this Alice. She didn't know right what she should do, but when seeing that our protagonist held his sword, everyone there starts to shout as saying that that was something impossible. Fred, he was quite serious and held the sword in a quite simple way. Rodolfo, he got scared without understanding anything. So he decides to advance together with Arthur on top of our main character. When realizing that he was being surrounded by the people Federico, he ended up getting impatient. He kneeled on the floor and used his impulse to jump quite high, and so he approaches Alice, who at that moment was quite scared. Rodolfo, he didn't stop and tried to attack our protagonist with everything again, but before he could do that, Fred hit the swordsman and used his leg to kick the others. However, something had hit our protagonist right on his shoulder. There he asked him to stop with this and look to his side. There was a person who was with a machine gun shooting at them. Carlos was there on the side saying that it was well done. Federico, obviously, he got scared and said that that was not possible. He didn't believe that the staff there was so cowardly like that, but still the swordsman, he took advantage of this moment to attack our protagonist in the sly. Carlos said that it was of great help at that moment, and so another shot is given in the direction of our hero. He managed to dodge sometimes, but soon this stops letting him advance, and attack our hero, taking advantage that he was busy. And at that time, something terrible happens. Alice leaves the child on the floor and advances on top of our hero. It is to try to defend him, she tries to sacrifice herself for him. Guys, look what love doesn't do. Our protagonist didn't understand very well how that could have happened, and he ended up shouting her name. However, the swordsman advanced on top of Alice to hit her with everything, but she would not let these things happen with our hero. So the swordsman advanced with a punch, and Federico was not going to let this happen again, and tried to counterattack. Fred's punch, he ended up hitting right on the forehead of that crazy guy, who ended up making a hole directly in his skull. So our protagonist approaches to try to catch Alice and proceed. The shots were given in direction to them. However, Fred leaves running Alice. She got scared and didn't know right what was happening. She was a little dazed, but our protagonist, he says that he will end Carlos's life and that he would never forgive him. Only that arrogant guy says that he would only do this in the next life. Our protagonist held himself to protect Alice, but at that moment someone ended up hitting the guards who were giving shots in our main character. And for the second time she hits directly the guys. An explosion of power happens, and that was the sixth sister. Julia, a helicopter, also appeared. And Carlos, he didn't know what he would do at that time. The guy realized that he was screwed. Julia, she was prepared to end their lives, and soon Carlos asked who was that girl who appeared there mysteriously. The girl asks our hero if he is Frederico, and ends up explaining that she is the sixth sister. The helicopter starts to descend, and she says that was a favor that she was doing for the seventh sister. He ended up realizing that it was his sister, and he got quite excited. So he looks back smiling, and she asks if he really is a genius. Soon after, Carlos thinks of ending the life of that girl and makes a signal for the guards who are preparing to get the weapons. However, she steps with everything on the floor and uses her power to throw one of the tiles with everything in one of the guards, which ends up hitting directly on his back. And still, she asks not to play with that kind of thing, and so gives a kick with everything in Carlos. Our protagonist takes advantage of this opportune moment to try to help Alice. And looks from the front to her, saying that the girl is a little kind of silly, and says that she left the child there because it would be safe. She was trying to explain herself, guys, but our protagonist says for her to stop talking, otherwise she would lose consciousness. Because of this, he tries to save her using his special medicine. The cut didn't hit any vital area, so she was not at risk of life, and after having done the traditional Chinese medicine, he asks her to rest. Our protagonist jumps with everything on the roof and goes in direction to that shameless Carlos, and still says that all that could end. At that exact moment, Carlos, without knowing what to do, he starts to get afflicted, and soon our protagonist asks how Carlos wants to lose his life. Only that scared the gentleman asked to spare his life. He didn't deserve to die. This guy there deserved to take a beating until forgetting how he did to stand up. Our protagonist says that this is not possible, and ends up giving a kick with everything in his stomach. The sixth sister passes next to our protagonist, asking what he will do with the Zhang family. He gives the command to destroy all the evil. And so the scene cuts to 2 days later, and in the newspapers only appeared the collapse of the Zhang family. Alice, she was in the hospital talking with Fred, saying that she has already listened to everything. Our protagonist peeling an apple. He ends up thanking the girl's grandfather. She says that it was not necessary to do all that, but she ends up eating the apple, saying that everything was already fine at that time. However, the protagonist, he would not accept all this, and says that he needs to regularize her body because the girl's meridians were destabilized. She asks if he is so worried like that about her. And Frederico says that obviously he is very worried since the girl was very important for him. This ends up leaving Alice a little embarrassed, guys, and she gets with the cheeks flushed. However, the protagonist warns that what he will say now is very important and that he hopes that she will not refuse. Maybe it was what she so much dreamed, guys. He was already thinking that he would ask her in dating, so she even ends up saying that it depends a lot on what he will say. The poor girl thought even that maybe it was a confession. However, Fred says that he wants to have her as disciple. This ends up leaving her a little confused and even a little frustrated. And because of this, she starts to throw several things in him, telling the boy to leave the room as fast as possible. But he says that he was completely serious, and so she throws a pillow with everything on his face while he leaves the room. The sixth sister was there, saying that he can't do this. Our protagonist takes advantage to ask what happened with the seventh sister, since she was not very well of health. Obviously, Julia, she didn't know how to explain what had happened, but she was trying to ask for help for the sixth sister. But she was with a lot of anger and anxiety. According to Julia, the seventh sister has always been a little weak and continued saying that maybe now it is the time for Jeong to give up and end soon with her life. This ends up leaving our protagonist scared. He didn't know right what she was wanting to say with these words. Diana. She was very worried about the seventh sister. Because of this, she was crying, trying to understand why our protagonist was taking so long. But the seventh sister, Jeong, she says that she will not lose for a little sick like that. Actually, our protagonist and Julia ends up approaching there, surprising them. Julia gives a hello for Jiang, and our protagonist starts to run, quite worried with the help of Diana, the seventh sister. She gets up a little and says that they are worried in vain, and that she was well. Only that Julia, she goes there and said that it would be better if everything ended faster. Fred takes advantage to give a good look at her pulse. This makes them get even more worried because it was not supposed to be anything much. Meanwhile, Fred says for the girl to calm down, otherwise her pulse will get disordered. With this, Frederico, he realizes that it was a small heart attack together with a loss of consciousness. With this, he knows that the disease is nothing simple, and it is something quite dangerous, so he decides to ask if it makes much time that this sensation in the girl had started. Meanwhile, Julia, the sixth sister, she only watched there in the corner. Diana says that the seventh sister did all this for our protagonist. However, Jiang, she didn't want that Diana stay telling there for Frederico the reason of her situation having worsened. Frederico says that he doesn't know what was the cause. It was at that moment that Julia approached, saying that it was because of Jiang having kneeled asking for her to save Frederico. This leaves Fred irritated, and he asks the reason of this having happened, and says that it was not necessary for her to have kneeled. Julia explains that she was worried of our protagonist ending up losing his life there for the Zhang family, and this ended up leaving him very sad for her, having kneeled only because of him. However, our protagonist kept thinking about the reason of Julia having appeared at that time to save him. So he starts to get up, saying that he already has the plan for the treatment. He decides to ask Zhang if it was necessary to abandon dignity because of him, and the seventh sister says that it was not that kind of thing that she was thinking when she kneeled. So she decided to say that when she met our main character, he was still quite little. She held the little Fred in her arms, and possibly he would not remember anything of this. The masters were there talking about Frederico's destiny, and asks for the seventh sister to take responsibility for him. Obviously, without thinking twice, she accepts and decides to take care of our main character. So simply she says that she is the eldest sister of our protagonist and that she decided to save him, and that's why our protagonist's life was total responsibility of her. But even so, our hero, he got upset. He didn't understand why all this had been done, but he realized that his sister was there for him, so he tried as much as possible to control his own emotions. Our protagonist asks for everyone to leave the room because he will cure the seventh sister. They ask themselves what kind of treatment our protagonist will do, but it is that he was needing force for this. And Jiang, she already stays thinking nonsense, guys. It even seems that she doesn't know our main character, Federico. He doesn't stay rolling very much and says that he will help the girl to take off the clothes, but she says that she manages to do this alone, and little by little she starts to throw. She was completely embarrassed because of this situation. And Federico too. This scoundrel stays with the cheeks flushed. The two others were outside without any expression until Diana hands water for Julia. The sixth sister decided to ask what kind of relationship she has with our protagonist, and the girl says that it is only friendship, but we know that if it depended on her, she would already be dating Federico. So Julia decides to ask if she is of our protagonist's constitution. And she still asks herself what kind of thing could be happening there inside, because it didn't make sense. Our protagonist is taking so long, so in the water she was seeing the destiny of her brother. And so they listen to a noise coming there from the room. They already think that a nonsense is happening, guys, and leave running there to stay attentive about what was happening. They hit the door with everything asking what they were doing there inside, and so they see our protagonist putting some needles in the seventh sister. But they don't understand right what was rolling there, and soon they leave. Quite embarrassed, the seventh sister apologizes for having shouted, but Federico, he realizes that that was very normal, in fact, since some needles were fincando there in her skin, right? The protagonist says that there is something that he still hadn't understood, so he decides to ask his sister why she had kneeled for Julia. But the girl simply answers that it is a long story, but makes our protagonist stop. He wanted to know if Julia had an immense power in the martial arts, and that's why his sister had kneeled there before her. Yang says that she trained every day to reach the highest levels of cultivation, and that ended up helping her to become the strongest sister among the seven sisters. She even managed to fight against the masters, of equal for equal, and the golden aura that she had around herself was quite intense, and that made everyone have a certain respect for her. However, there was a day that she realized that she was advancing her own level. This ended up making her fall, with everything on the floor losing consciousness. She was not managing to support the size of power that she had reached. From that day on, she decided that she would train more and more, however this ended up causing even more problems for the sixth sister, and our protagonist decides to ask what kind of problems and consequences were those, and Jiangge says that she didn't care for any consequence. She only wanted to get stronger and stronger. Our protagonist, he gets determined to try to help in some way, even not knowing what consequences were these. So he decides to send one more needle, which was the last there, in Jiang. He also told his sister that he wanted to reverse her situation. The girl gets excited, asking if this was true. So our protagonist leaves the room, and Diana, she already asks if by chance the seventh sister had improved. Federico says that she needs to rest a lot now, and he decides to ask Julia if he can see her pulse. Without understanding there what was the real reason, she ends up getting a little curious, but it is that he had listened something horrible about the constitution of the two and wanted to try to help Julia. He was not content in saving only the seventh sister, he also wanted to save his other sister, the sixth. And for who is asking it in the comments, no guys, Federico is not blood brother of them, it is an only brother of consideration since he is orphan and was left there in the mountains. Julia, she asks if it is possible to do this right, cure her situation. And our protagonist says that for sure he can cure her. So he holds in the girl's hands Diana. She stays in the background watching all that situation. An intense glow starts to pass through them. That was the power of our protagonist circulating in Julia's body, trying to analyze her situation. He was trying to understand what he had to do at that exact moment, and what was the bad consequences that she ended up catching for having trained too much for him. Those things didn't make much sense. He had never seen a disease equal to hers. Julia's and Jiang's energy were quite similar. This made him open his eyes carefully. So he managed to find the key point of her energy, which was like the one of a dragon. This makes Julia start to feel an intense pain, and our protagonist realizes everything that was happening. Julia asks why she is feeling this strange pain, and our protagonist says that Julia understood wrong. The seventh sister Julia's power core was broken, and she could not do the cultivation for many years. Because of this, Julia decided to ask what would be happening and how she would heal. So our protagonist warns that someone had played a curse on her. Julia doesn't understand anything, because she can't imagine who could put a curse on her. Federico also didn't understand why this kind of thing is happening with her, and this ended up scaring Julia even more. Actually, it was a very strong curse, of which our protagonist had never seen. You will see that each sister has a BO for our protagonist to solve, guys. Federico doesn't have a second apiece. If she doesn't solve this as soon as possible, it could end her life. Diana asks who would be able to do this kind of thing, and Fred didn't think of other people unless the enemies of the masters, even though they came from a calm family. Federico knew that his masters had many enemies. Julia also knew this, but she couldn't think of anyone at that moment. There didn't come in her mind anyone who could have done this evil. So Federico says that he has a special way of fixing that curse and that she needs to search for some very rare flowers. He still said that he could help in this, however, he was in his extreme limit. He was quite tired. Julia asks what kind of medicine our protagonist needs, and he decides to explain in details which flowers are these and other medicines that he will need. Meanwhile, the seventh sister, she gets up saying that she should go to the company. There, to her company, the girl only thought of working guys. It is not for nothing that they are Chinese. Federico says that her body is not ready and that she has to rest, but she says that she received there a message saying that there was someone causing problems in her company and they needed to solve. There in Zhang's company, there were 2 people who were calling for the manager. Those people said that that company owed 2,000 for them. The poor receptionist, she says that she doesn't understand much of this and wanted to call for the staff of the finances. However, the staff didn't care at all, guys. They start to bring some weapons and to break the whole place. They start to hit the televisions and to break everything and taking advantage also to break the floors there of the building. However, the seventh sister she approaches with our protagonist, and Diana, that mysterious guy, asks what she was doing there. So decide to say that it was time to end all that and ask for everyone to advance on top of the girl. As she was very hurt, she would not be able to do anything. However, Federico approaches to try to solve the situation. He gives a kick in one of the guys, and so he also gives a punch in the other, and quickly he goes passing from one to the other, almost until arriving at the chief. He will realize that their movement was very familiar. So a mysterious guy who is called Davi, he says that Federico, he was very good, only that Davi, he stays getting scared and says to forget about all that. Our protagonist, he doesn't understand very well the situation and asks if the guy is trying to make him a fool. So Davy, he answers that if our protagonist loses, he will double the debt with them. Davy, he had a card up his sleeve and he thought that our protagonist was weak to fall in this, but Federico asks how they should fight at that moment. Without thinking twice, Davy simply advances on top of our hero Fred. He realizes that Davi's attack was very weak, so decides to return with a punch right in the face of the crazy guy to try to end with everything in a single attack. Davy starts to tremble and even loses consciousness because of this. He says that he will call his master to solve this fight. Fred doesn't understand how that guy had a master being that he was very weak. Davy warns for our protagonist is that his master was quite powerful, so he takes the cell phone and calls asking for help for her. His master was a girl and she answers saying that everything was fine and wanted to help him. Actually, who is the master of this guy there, guys? It was Julia, the sixth sister. She approaches saying that she will take care of that situation. Davy asks his master why she is already there. This left Federica more confused even, guys. Without understanding why of her being called master by this guy, Julia asks her subordinate why of him being in that place destroying everything. According to her students, they're the guys that they should be training in the academy. He tries to make an excuse, but Julia doesn't accept, and starts to fight with him. The guy gets a little afraid and says that she is quite strange, and doesn't understand why she is so aggressive like that. Today, Julia says that she lost patience with him and tells him to leave soon from there. Davy gets scared and says that originally it was a work that had been paid by a company he was paid to arrive and destroy everything. Julia says that she understood, and that it was for him to tell the rest later. So she apologizes for our protagonist, and also for Zhang for all the disturbance. Davy gets scared to know that our protagonist was her brother, and also of this other girl. Realizing that he committed a mistake of attacking these people, and also the company of the seventh sister, he gets scared. Zhang, she says that they need to fix everything, all that was destroyed. So she starts to think of a person who could have paid this guy there, Davy, to arrive until there and destroy the things, and still says that they should have come personally to talk with her. However, Fred, he only wanted to understand why of those people being disciples of Julia. He didn't understand why she had students so weak like that. The girl says that they all are disciples of her, and that for some reason they are weak currently, but she warns that she will deal with them later if something bad happens. At that moment, our protagonist asks if he could visit her academy. However, Julia, she didn't want very much to take them there, guys. But the seventh sister, she also stays insisting to go together. She makes it very clear that she was not very willing to show the academy, but ends up giving in and takes them there. The girl asks for Davy and the staff to take them to the academy to know the place, so the scene changes there. We go to the company that is enemy of the seventh sister. The girl there, she had thrown a glass with everything on the wall. She is Jessica, and she was quite irritated. She was holding a cell phone talking with the staff of another company about how they managed to fail in that attack. This ended up leaving her though even more irritated, so she ends up calling some members of the company to verify an alert that had been created. Right now, one of the employees gets up to talk about this, and that from now on, he will manage to proceed with the plan. Jessica asks what kind of plan he would have in mind. They wanted to eliminate Zhang and her whole company. Because of this, they would make the company suffer an attack. She asks if this would not cause a police investigation, but soon her employees approach, saying that she was thinking too much about that matter, and that there would not happen any investigation. Probably these guys, they were already connected with the police. They would only cause some car accidents that would be done by these employees, and from there on, they could proceed to end the Seventh Sisters Company. In a beautiful afternoon, our protagonist and his group, they were going to Julia's academy. Our protagonist had found a little small that place, and David, who is there on the side of our hero, says that it would be good for him to train together with them. However, Julia asks for Davy to stay quiet and not to talk nonsense. Julia continues saying that it was a good place to stay firm and strong, and also to improve the cultivation in our main character. He thinks about managing to stay like this too powerful to equal she. It had been a good time, actually, that he didn't train, so it was good for them to start training, because our protagonist could get rusty. He doesn't even need to train, guys. Every minute, someone appears wanting to fight with him. Julia then invites everyone to do a day of training, so when they enter, the people were there training with all the possible concentration. However, when they see Julia, the staff already starts to look to her and approach giving welcomes. Little by little, they start to do their oath for the girl, and she sighs as if she doesn't like any of it. Diana, who was on the other side, was impressed with everything she was seeing. Someone had given a punch so strong a doll there that almost broke. It would end up giving welcomes for Julia. This called the attention of our main character because the staff there called her master. So he notes a guy who had arrived and asks who was the man with white hair. It says that our protagonist is not worth the talk. The guy is already all arrogant and says that he would not waste his precious time with Frederico. This guy's name is Kaike and he was black belt. Julia asks what Kaike was doing there at that moment in her academy. He says that he was training with the younger staff. Actually, he was giving a beating there in Julia's students. Davi enters in the front and explains that the protagonist was very powerful. Only the Kaige doesn't care about this and gives a punch in Davy's face. This Davy appeared in the series there, only to take a beating, guys, for the love of God, before if Davy falls on the floor and starts to call attention of Julia. Soon the smug guy says that it is time to start a fight between them. He was challenging Julia's academy. He still says that if they are with little fear, they could flee at any moment. We already know that rule, right, guys? Talker has a bad time. Julia gets a little irritated because this guy was disrespecting her only. That actually Kaige, he had a hidden plan. His chief, who is a bald old man, said that if he managed to defeat Julia, he could take this academy for him. This ended up making Kaike get determined and literally want to fight to get the academy. However, Julia was not going to let this so cheap, and says that she will fight against him. But at that moment, someone ends up entering in the front. It was our dear Frederico, who was determined to give a beating in this extra. It is this same that we like to see, guys. Extra asking for little potty. Julia explains that Kaike, he was black belt that could be quite powerful, and maybe our protagonist wouldn't manage to defeat him. You really think my daughter? You think that our protagonist will lose with this guy there with the face of Earthworm? Fred doesn't care about this kind of thing, and says that there is no problem at all, and that he will solve everything on the base of beating. The crazy guy was very balado, guys, I tell you. He still says that he has the greatest pleasure of hitting these smug and arrogant guys. Obviously, this leaves Kaike irritated, saying that he will not accept to be disrespected in the front of the others. But our protagonist says that he will solve this on the base of beating, and says that he will give a punch in his face. And in this way, they start to beat mouth as if it was two children, one saying that it is better than the other. This makes Kaike very nervous. And he says that he will take all of Frederico's women. He looked there for our protagonist surrounded of women, and already imagined that Frederico lived in a harem. Well, that could be right, guys. But these Chinese protagonists there only think about fighting. Frederico got a little irritated with this talk there, guys. And so he prepares for the fight. Diana was watching, saying that Kaike obviously would take a beating a lot. She already knew that our protagonist was stronger. So Frederico obviously agrees with this and accepts the duel. At that moment, Kaike, he advances on top of our protagonist with everything. He jumps to the top and prepares to give a powerful kick. That kick starts to create fireballs for all the sides. The students who were around realized that that was very dangerous. However, Fred, he had supported that attack as if it was nothing. He even smiled in the face of the danger, and Kaike started to swear at our hero. And in this way, Fred says that he will end with him. At that instant, it was time for Frederico to return for the attack, and still said that he gave a lot of chance for Kaike. He gives a kick with everything. The blow ends up launching Kaike far away. Not even Fred expected for this, guys. He didn't imagine that the guy there would take a beating so much, and Diana stays in the cheer for him. Kaike, he had hidden a wall, and the other students start to approach, asking if he was well. However, Kaike, he starts to get up and say that our protagonist is not strong enough to defeat him. Certainty that this guy, he was dying of fear. And guys, his legs there were even shaky. Actually, he even had broken 2 bones and was only getting up because there were many people watching. If you arrived until this part of the video, consider leaving a comment, so YouTube indicates our video to more people and has more chances. I gave to bring the continuation here for you. He could not lose at that moment, so he starts to get determined, saying that he will defeat our hero Frederico. He was almost holding a laugh, asking if the guy really is so strong like that he talked. Kaike says that he will end this fight in a matter of minutes, and that it was for everyone to stay watching. Meanwhile, Frederico simply will use only one hand. This makes the guy he feel threatened, and because of this he advances for the attack. He gave a jump quite high in direction to Frederico and prepared to give a counter-attack. However, Fred only watched that scene and realized that he would win in one way or another. Actually, Kaike, he was not so strong like that, and our protagonist, he prepared to give a counter-attack. The crazy guy, he already realized that it was going to be very dangerous and ended up feeling our protagonist's hand and grab his foot. At that moment, he felt an exorbitant pain and ended up falling to the ground, as if his legs had been deactivated. The students, they were scared. without understanding what was happening. Meanwhile, our protagonist, he approaches, saying that he won that fight. Frederico, he warns that Kaike, he shouldn't appear in that academy anymore. Then Julia takes the opportunity and asks her students to take that guy. Davy approaches and says he will return the punch he gave him, and said he will return it right in the face to ruin the wake. Davi ends up taking a punch in the face, goes flying far away. Someone had approached at that moment, and it was a mysterious guy. Frederico, he was observing that situation, and this bald man, he was Kaike's master. He was a foreigner and didn't speak Mandarin very well, and ended up advancing towards our protagonist with an intense power. Each step he took was like a hole in the world. Frederico realized that this power was very great, and that he could probably stand up to his masters. Julia asks our protagonist to be careful from then on, because something very dangerous was coming in his direction. That old man, he was known as the founder of Taekwondo in Korea. This little old man's name was Takawa, and he is a little impressed since people there knew him. As he approaches, he says that he would destroy all of them who were not his disciples. Kaike, he was completely scared with everything that was happening there. The other students didn't know what to do, but they felt that their strength was getting stronger and stronger. Kaike then speaks the true strength behind him, who was trained with that gentleman, Julia. I didn't understand what people were saying there at that time, but our protagonist tells her to stay safe, as he himself would take care of that situation. Our protagonist says he will open the gate of the Seven Saints, and Julia, her cheeks turned red, already imagining our protagonist all buff. Then he continued because he would fight. Takawa, he says that he will end our hero's life, and Frederico told him to make the first move, that he would be waiting. Everyone watches quietly, not understanding that situation. Then Takawa, he advances towards our protagonist. He is completely irritated. The blow flies directly, and Fred, he advances to counterattack Takawa. He felt threatened at that exact moment, but the attack of the two hits, everything creating an intense explosion to Takawa. He takes advantage of this moment to kick our hero with everything, and soon after he tries to give other blows, but Frederico ends up protecting himself. Because of this, he ended up realizing that Takawa, he had a lot of combat experience. People, they were surprised with all this and were even cheering there for Fred, especially Diana. He was even a little lost there. At that time, Julia realized that the protagonist's defense was very good, and because of this, Takawa, he ends up advancing to make an extremely different attack. However, the gentleman realized that our hero, he was also strong. It wouldn't be so easy, and he starts to defend the attacks. The blows were quite varied, and our hero was there defending from all of them. Takawa, he noticed an opening, but our hero, he had a plan and was smiling because of that. The situation ended up scaring Takawa, who didn't understand very well what was happening. Realizing that the guy had hesitated, Fred advanced towards that crazy guy. He used one of his attacks that was defended with the kick. The gentleman realized that it was not a good thing, and because of that, our protagonist advanced running towards Takawa. He used one of his attacks that was defended with the kick. The gentleman, he realized that it was not very good, and therefore our hero, he advanced again, giving the old man an elbow. Taking advantage of this opening, Takawa attacks again, and the old man felt the attack with everything saying that it was over, and in this way he flew with everything into the wall. That ended up scaring Kaike, who didn't understand how that had been done, but our hero, he was strong enough to defeat anyone who got in his way. People were cheering there for our hero, and the students said that that gentleman wasn't anything special, and that he ended up losing to a child. The other students, the gentleman Takawa, ended up getting lost there, and without knowing what they should do. Because of that, Kaike, he also stayed there, kinda lost, and soon after he got angry. He starts to emanate a red aura, and the guy swore that he could handle fighting against our hero. He shouted for Fred, because at that moment he didn't understand very well what was happening. Frederico, he was confused, because that fight was already over, and yet the guy was still there wanting to fight. However, the gentleman fallen on the floor starts to smile. He takes out of his clothes 2 flasks and ends up drinking that magical liquid. Kaike understood very well what his master was doing. However, our protagonist wasn't understanding anything. The gentleman then says that that was a secret technique of medicine? His body starts to get incredibly strong, his clothes even tear. The old man's students there have never seen him like that. Kaike also seems that he had never seen it, but he knew what it was about. Takawa, he didn't care about the consequences, and ends up advancing towards Kaike, giving him a punch with everything in his face. He observes our hero directly, ready to end that fight. Julia, she realized the gravity of that situation, and says that she will help Frederico. The two stand side by side against this gentleman Takawa, and our protagonist makes a challenge that whoever falls first will have to pay for food for the other. Master Takawa, he advances towards Frederico in the middle of this confusion, and our hero, he managed to dodge that attack. Because of this, the gentleman, he prepares another blow. Julia says that she will advance first, and then our protagonist could go together to complete the attack. However, our hero, he didn't care. He advances first. Without mercy or pity, then the two at the same time advance and kick that gentleman, who ends up managing to defend himself. However, at that exact moment, the gentleman was preparing to attack Julia with everything, and when he does that, our girl, she manages to dodge perfectly in the air. She looks at our protagonist, and he already knew what he should do. At that moment, he had distracted the gentleman so that Julia could give a blow to his back, and taking advantage of that attack, Frederico, he also advances to give another one. They had weakened that gentleman a little, who even ends up getting irritated, saying that he will end the life of the two. Because of that, Fred advances towards with Julia. He prepares to kick, and the girl also loads an upcoming blow. The two end up managing to hit everything in the old man. He keeps complaining, saying that he was feeling a lot of pain, and this even makes him fall to his knees on the ground, and after a while he falls with his head forward. Fred, he realized that it wasn't that difficult, and Davy approaches saying that they are like incredible people. He holds our protagonist's shoulder, saying that the boy he fought very well, and asks if he has any secret to be so good at martial arts. Then he asks if the people who were there would like to know about this. All the students were enthusiastic to understand how Frederico's power worked. Our protagonist, he was a very talented guy, but ends up saying that he will teach them this path of martial arts. They say that training was the best, that it should start as soon as possible. Then the scene changes to a little later at night. There, the people prepared for an entire banquet. Fred, he was really liking that, and the seventh sister, she tells them to ignore Fred, who was eating too much and causing a certain shame there in the people. But that was normal guys. Protagonists always ate a lot. Soon the seventh sister starts to feel a little sick. She says that she wasn't feeling that bad, but that she will lie down to rest. Fred said he will help her if anything happens. Because of this, after a while, our hero goes away. He says that he'll prepare the medicine when he returns next time, and his sister says that she'll be very happy if he returns with the cure. And the seventh sister takes the opportunity to tell the driver that if anything happens to her dear little brother, Julia will not forgive Davy. He said he will take very good care of our protagonist, and then goes away with our hero. Julia says that it's been 2 years since she saw our protagonist for the last time, and Diana was there taking care of the seventh sister, inside the car. The protagonist says that he'll take very good care of her, but that they need to run directly to a place where he could better treat his sister Davy. He says not to worry because there weren't many cars on the street. At that time of night, the scene changes to another place, where there's a mysterious guy. He had a very mafia face, and it was a guy who was following our hero, ready to hit him in the car. Then he steps on the accelerator, goes with everything, and even ends up giving a malicious smile. In the last moment, that man ended up causing a car crash, and he says that he would end all that situation now. With the seventh sister, the car crash was very intense, and caused a small explosion in our hero's car. After a while, someone ended up getting out of the black car, and ended up taking the cell phone to take the photos that were necessary to prove the accident. However, when he took the cell phone and opened his camera, he realized that there was no one there in the front seat, other than the driver. He took the photo there of the seventh sister, along with Diana, and said that he ended her life. However, someone appeared behind him, which left the guy there a little scared. It was Frederico who was there asking what he was doing. The boy gives a warning: if Frederico approaches, he will end our hero's life, but obviously this guy doesn't have the power for that. And our hero was already preparing 2 needles. He advanced towards with an attack. Those 2 needles hit right in the boy's chest, who didn't understand very well what was happening. He felt a very great pain and couldn't describe it. And those needles caused a laughing fit. He said that this boy was going to suffer a lot. However, the boy continued laughing and said that that was a gigantic torture. Then Frederico, he already took out the 2 needles, because he had already realized who had sent him to do that. He asked the boy what he intended to do at that moment. He hands the cell phone to our hero, saying that there were some recordings of the seventh sister. He believed that the seventh sister had lost her life, but someone ends up taking the cell phone from that guy. It was Davy, and he was completely injured. He ends up remembering that boy's face, and, to the surprise of that crazy guy, the seventh sister ends up coming out alive from inside. She was irritated and said that he shouldn't do that kind of thing. He turns his back asking if she was okay at that moment, and all this was thanks to Frederico. In a short period of time, he ended up using his powers to save everyone, and the boy asks for his cell phone again. He does this because he couldn't leave those evidences, but someone ends up taking a photo of him, and it was Frederico who was using facial recognition mode and just recorded that whole scene. The boy says that he will fight with Frederico, but Davy says that he won't let this happen because no one can hit his boss. And for the first time in this work, Davy managed to be useful for something and gives a big punch in the crazy guy. He was excited because he managed to finish someone, and soon after that they went to the seventh sister's mansion. Inside, she decides to finish the treatment with Fred. She says that she was perfectly fine at that moment in which she had already improved Fred. In turn, he's happy with such news, and soon after the seventh sister, she says that he could continue at will. Fred says that he will do something that he has never done before, which is probably something very different. She asks what kind of thing he is talking about, and he says that she also has a curse, but that he'll be able to fix all that. You're already seeing it, right, guys? The masters trained our hero to be removing the curse from his sisters. That ends up leaving the seventh sister confused, and she doesn't understand very well what she should do at that moment. In another place, a man was there preparing to do something a very beautiful woman ends up handing him some wine, and the man takes advantage to give a little bite on the chicken that was there in his other hand. However, he was completely lost and felt something horrible in his body. He then threw everything to all sides and realized that someone had touched his curse. Someone who was probably strong enough to understand all that. And the image of the sixth sister started to pass in the guy's head, thinking that it had something to do with her. Soon he realized that someone was there doing something horrible. As he couldn't let someone touch his curse, he ended up preparing to make an attack. He was too excited to do that kind of thing. Meanwhile, Diana ended up entering the room where our protagonist was. He asks what happened, and she wanted to know if she would need her help to do the treatment on the seventh sister. The big boy says that obviously yes, but only after 1 hour, then he goes there to the outside. Frederico kept thinking about what kind of thing could be happening inside, and the image of the two will end up appearing in his mind. Nothing shameless, he even got excited at that time. He was even trying to stay a little calmer and not think about those nonsense. At that moment, he sits on the sofa to watch the news and calm down a little. However, he ends up reading about a criminal gang that was roaming the city. He keeps watching the news and then tries to read something. At that moment, he smells a little different and a black smoke appears dominating the whole place, as if something was burning. Soon he realizes that there was fire coming out to all sides, and realizing this fire, Fred prepares to do what he knows how to do best, which is to save people. After that, he starts to throw water to all sides, trying to put out the fire, and he starts to do this even with a certain desperation, because he realized that the lives of many people would be at risk. However, the fire was very strong, it didn't stop in any way. He tries to open the door, but he also couldn't. On the outside, someone had sealed that place, and it was one of the participants who was with the purpose of ending the life of the seventh sister. The guy was smoking. Soon after setting fire in the building, he sighs deeply and says that it was time to go away, because the mission was already accomplished. Another companion of this guy keeps saying that they should watch to see the outcome there of the fire. However, the red-haired man, he says that this was not necessary, because in fact the mission was already finished. Another guy appears and said that it's time to go away, because the place it would be full of people. And now that they had already set fire there in the building, they keep saying that they will go away so they wouldn't be arrested. Our hero was inside trying to open the door in all possible ways, but he couldn't, and that wasn't very good. But he wasn't succeeding, and the smoke was spreading that could be dangerous as the entire place. He was being taken by the flames. Frederico, he should do something urgent, no matter what happened. Then he ends up breaking down the door with everything and asks if the seventh sister was okay. However, she and Diana were preparing to do that thing that, because of this, Diana ends up getting embarrassed. However, Fred, he looks to the side and decides to explain that the house was on fire. The two don't understand very well, right? How come on fire out of nowhere? Then they run away, and the seventh is a question, how the house was like. That Frederico thinks that the cables must have been dropped or someone set fire. Simple as that. Perceiving the situation, Fred tries to find out who would be the person who was behind all this, but without having much time to be acting as a detective, and he ends up using his powers to get out of there as quickly as possible. In the middle of all this, the cables start to catch fire even more, so he ends up kicking the door hard. It was time to go away from that place, and they leave the mansion running with all their strength. Our protagonist looks back and returns to see if there was anyone else there nearby. He had breathed a lot of smoke, and was tired of all this. Diana, she starts calling the firefighters, and the seventh sister, she was tired because she was still sick. Jiang said that it was not necessary to call the fire department and could only let the house catch fire. Diana doesn't understand the reason for this behavior of her, then asks what had happened. Jiang, she doesn't answer. She only says that they will continue to the monitoring room to try to see who had done this. Looking at the cameras, they managed to identify 3 villains who had done this arson. She already figured out right away who was involved in all this. Fred asks, who are these crazy guys who had reached this point of setting fire in a house? The seventh sister. She explains that she has a feud with a company and continues saying that Jessica from the other company was not a very good person and that they should talk now with the public relations department. And she still completes saying that she must end with this feud right now. Time goes by at that moment, and so we go inside the rival company. There was that Jessica commanding her employees to finish the mission that was given to them, the red-haired boy. He had taken a slap in the face, and he tells Jessica that he was trying to finish the mission as much as possible. These people there were shameless, and she decides to warn that this kind of thing can't happen without her permission, then ends up stepping on his face. She still asks what they were planning to do now. A white-haired man called Arthur prepares to help this Jessica, but that woman, she was completely irritated and asks him to say quickly what he wants. He decides to explain that the author there of the arson, in fact, this guy there who is under her foot, and continues saying that this was a great plan, because it will hinder the company of Jiang. She reflects a little and thinks that this makes sense and ends up thanking them. Arthur says that this could be a very relevant topic in public relations, and soon Jessica ends up saying that that red-haired boy had to suffer a little more. However, he was being very helpful in fulfilling the missions in the last days and ends up asking if he knows perfectly what he should do. The guy, he understood very well this type of wording. And soon Jessica approaches Arthur and says that she has some very interesting ideas, and continues saying that they should go together to the back room to do certain little things, if you know what I mean. She holds Arthur's tie and says that he has a kind of hard work to do that night, and the guy says that he will leave her very satisfied. The guy there with the red hair, he just keeps watching all that, and the door closed right in his face. Obviously he was irritated, because Arthur was using that guy there simply to use Jessica, the seventh sister. She was there on the next day, completely perfect and wonderful. She looks back asking how she was. Diana obviously says that she was very beautiful, then she puts on the glasses, and asks if she also looked beautiful with glasses, this woman, and she looks beautiful in any way, guys. And Diana says that she is very beautiful. and Diana never expected that she would kiss the owner of such a famous and beautiful company even more. And Jiang, she says that she has to stop with this nonsense and focus on getting rid of these enemies. They should in fact find out who was behind all those evils. Then she arrives in the room and warns our hero that it was time to go away. Frederico, who is reading some things, he says that he was preparing for that exact moment, and she asks what he was reading. And he says that it was a medicine book that he had won from the masters, and that he was learning a little more advanced techniques. At that moment, he thinks right away about Alice, and realizes that he had to finish doing something with her. Then Jiang says that they have to finish all that as quickly as possible, which is this mission of finding out who is doing these evils. However, on the other side of the city, Jessica was looking at her cell phone completely lost. She was seeing the news, and she was getting more and more irritated, because the news there of Jiang's house having caught fire had spread, and everyone was knowing about this. Arthur warns that she wouldn't need to worry because this was part of the plan. She says that it was probably something very interesting, this plan of Arthur, and he answers that they could calm down, because everything was under control. In fact, Arthur says that there is only one last step that they had to follow. The red-haired boy called Alan, he enters the room running. Arthur, he had the plan to deliver him to the police as if he had hired the thief, the criminal. And Jessica says that it was a great false proof to use at that moment. Because of this, their cell phones start to ring. Soon she takes the cell phone to answer and talk to the person on the other side of the line. She answers and asks who was speaking, and it was someone from the security guards who was speaking to bring some people up there on the building. She says that there is no problem and can send them up. And so she turns off the cell phone completely happy, because it was time for her little show to start Jiang together with her brother. There, our hero. They had entered that building, prepared to find out everything. Soon an officer she appears saying that the seventh sister and Frederico were there. Jessica, obviously, she accepted their entry since they were prepared there to make that plan. Because of this, Yang says that she went to that place on her own. The security guards were all around them, prepared for what had to happen. They were already kind of aware that our protagonist was buff, so they were kind of scared. Meanwhile, several reporters were in front of Jessica's desk asking several things about what had happened. The girl says that she caught the bandit who was behind having burned Jiang's house. Jiang appears at that moment and says to have recordings of the members of Jessica's company, and that it was she who ordered them to do this. However, Jessica, she says that those recordings were not necessary, because she already caught the person who was behind all this. The seventh sister didn't quite understand what the blonde meant. Meanwhile, the reporters were very excited, as this news would shake the entire city. Jessica then asked to enter, and the door opened slowly. Arthur appears together with Alan, who was tied up at that moment. Someone asked them to stop. Then Arthur explains that it was orchestrated by a small group and that boy called Alan. He was behind all this, and that it was also a plan of the Seventh Sister's company for you to understand. Guys, they don't keep calling her Seventh Sister, no. They keep calling her Jiang even. But it's just for you to understand. Obviously, Jiang got irritated because she wasn't part of this, and was there without understanding anything. All the people start to get surprised with what had happened to Jessica. She takes a compliment of her recordings, saying that she had proof of all that. And then she points all the data of Alan saying that that was necessary. Jiang wasn't understanding what had happened and asked how it was possible for her to have gotten that information. Frederico soon realized that that was nothing more than a trap, and they were creating false proofs. And soon after that, a police officer enters the place and realizes that all the documentation was true. She turns to the seventh sister asking what had happened. She demands that she explain everything that was happening and if in fact this Alan was an employee of Jiang. The seventh sister warns that this is a lie and that she doesn't even know this boy. And soon Jessica asks if she will avoid all that evidence that was in front of them and the seventh sister. She thinks very well what she should do at that moment, because anything that she said she could end up getting complicated. And then Frederico, realizing that something was wrong, he already gets close to that boy, of which Jessica had great evidences. She asks Jiang if she has something to say, and that obviously all that would be resolved in court. Everyone there was turning against Jiang, but Frederico, he says that he has something to say. She asks, what is this boy going to do? And our protagonist asks if he could ask some questions to this Alan in public in front of the cameras. Arthur, who is right behind, he says that everything is okay. Then Jessica takes advantage, and says that he could do it, because they wouldn't take anything from him. Fred approaches Alan. He was realizing that this guy was completely altered. Because of this, our protagonist knew more or less what was happening. Then he touches the boy's shoulder and decides to ask if he really is an employee of the Seventh Sister, and if someone was ordering him to answer these questions. He simply answers that he is an employee of the Seventh Sister. Then Fred starts to use his powers and asks if he could think a little more about these questions. The boy was with his conscience heavy, and then he starts to recover little by little his own sanity. And soon Arthur says that there is something strange happening. Alan, he starts to feel an intense pain at that exact moment, and all the people who were with the cameras start to record as fast as possible. That was live being reported on all televisions. Then Alan, he says that he is not an employee of the Seventh Sister, and that all this was commanded by Jessica Arthur. He doesn't understand how that could have happened, and the people who were with the cameras start to take several photos and to record all that situation. He starts talking that Jessica ordered him to set fire on Jiang's house and also to burn all the files. However, the girl says that all that was a lie and that she couldn't do that kind of thing. The officer asks Jessica what had happened at that moment, and the woman tries to downplay all that, talking that it was a lie and that everything was being invented. However, Alan refutes, saying that in fact was all plan of her and Arthur. Then the officer starts to think about what she should do at that moment. And Alan, he wasn't understanding what he had done wrong, since he was only telling the truth. Jessica starts to get extremely nervous, and Federico asks if Alan has any evidence of the things that he said. Then Alan says that everything was inside his pocket, and our protagonist then cuts the ropes that were holding Alan's wrist. The boy thanks our hero and continues talking that all this was prepared by Jessica and that he could prove with just one thing. Then he takes out his cell phone with an audio that was recorded on the night that he was beaten. In that audio, it said that Jessica had agreed in having burned the Seven Sisters' house, that all that would have been planned. Both Jessica and Arthur started to tremble on their bases. And Alan? He continues playing the audio, talking that everyone should listen to that, because it was the only truth that he had in his hands. Fred ends up smiling and asks if the people have anything to say. Obviously that Jessica and Arthur start to deny all this, saying that audio was fake. Then he asks the people to start observing better in her actions. The cameras start to realize everything that was happening, and soon Jessica ends up burning herself, asking how that boy could have betrayed her. He said that in fact he always dreamed of working for her. However, this betrayal that she did with him left him very upset. The officer ends up placing the handcuffs on that girl's hand and tells everyone to step away and that she would take Jessica to the custody. Everything was being finished, and the reporters start asking to Jessica if she could explain herself. Arthur, who is there trembling with fear, he says that everything had ended at that exact moment, and the people already start to leave the room. And Alan? He starts to think better about his life. Time passes, and Jiang, together with Federico, end up leaving that place. She ends up thanking a little for everything that he did. He said that it wasn't anything special, and that he only used the knowledge that he already had. Then Jiang warns that a time of peace will come for her company, and that our protagonist, if he wanted, could help her with some things. She ends up asking if he could also help the sixth sister with certain things, mainly with her curse. Our protagonist talks that he was thinking there and this curse of her, and that he had even asked something to his masters, related to curses of this type. The master at the time had said something mysterious. She asked Fred what the master was wanting to say. When he spoke these things, they're kind of strange. He talks about the snakes that are used for curses, and one didn't appear. We ask if it was a snake with wings on its back, and if that really existed. At first, our protagonist, he doesn't know very well if this kind of thing exists, but he believes in his master. Then he talks that he will prepare some things and will go to the mountain to see if he finds the snake. Taking advantage of this fact, they say that they will go to the biggest shopping mall of the city, because it was necessary to buy some things there. Fred leaves the car running, talking that he'll prepare the things. Then he visits the clothes store, then the accessories store, and finally the jewelry store, and he simply walks here and there with his hands in his pocket. But at that moment, his cell phone starts to vibrate. He decides to take it and check the messages. It was a message from Alice. It had been a long time since they had seen each other, and while our hero there he was using the cell phone, something ends up happening. A woman in front of him looks at Federico and says that he was taking photos of her. Fred gets confused, because he wasn't doing any of that, and the woman asks him to stop and delete those photos. Fred even tries to explain himself and that in fact he was only answering a message. Soon she ends up approaching, very irritated, until a fat gentleman he approaches asking what was happening. The woman, she explains all the situation about our protagonist was taking photos secretly, and the guy simply throws the glasses of drink that he was with, who approaches our hero completely irritated, asking why he had done this. The people around get completely irritated with the situation. And our protagonist? He even tries to explain himself and says that in fact he wasn't taking any photo, he was only answering a message. The man prepares to give a punch in our hero with everything, but at that moment he ends up dodging until he looks back, holding the arm of that gentleman. The guy keeps screaming, talking that it was hurting a lot. And our protagonist already talks that the guy there was the one who looked for a fight, then he already goes away even from these crazy people. And still tries to explain that everything was nothing more than a misunderstanding. The guy continues irritated, asking how that could have happened. However, someone appears asking what was happening there at that exact moment. The people look to the sides asking who would be that person, and it was the seventh sister who was there to protect our hero. The people get enchanted with her beauty. And Federico gives a hello to the girl again. She holds Fred's arm and simply asks what he was doing there. Because of this, everyone starts to get embarrassed knowing that our protagonist was accompanied by such a beautiful girl like that. She pulls our hero away at that moment, talking that they will go shopping. And the other one was getting even more irritated. The man who was accompanying this woman gives a slap on her with everything since he thought that she was lying. And meanwhile, Federico talks that she was holding him with too much strength. She asks if he doesn't like this sensation, and she explains that everyone was envious of him. That's why he was calling so much attention while they walked. And because of this, our big boy, he gets all excited. After that, they go away, and our protagonist leaves the car. He gives a goodbye to her, talking to the girl to take care, and Jiang says that everything was okay, while Diana also gives a goodbye to him, and after saying goodbye, the car goes away. Then he starts to walk, going away to his house. But a mysterious shadow starts to appear behind our protagonist. He tries to give a direct attack that ends up leaving Federico confused. He already looks back, feeling that he will be attacked, and the guy already arrives attacking our hero, and Fred manages to defend himself. However, his opponent used the Tai Chi hand technique. Frederico even says that this technique is very powerful, but he wasn't going to just stand there taking the hit. That's why he's able to block, creating an opening in his opponent, and gets ready to hit him hard with a punch to the ribs. The guy realized that Frederico was very powerful and even ended up stepping back. If by any chance that blow from Fred had landed directly, the guy wouldn't have survived. The mysterious guy counterattacks using fire fists. That was being an intense battle, with both showing all their power. And after a brief moment, the guy stops and starts thinking. Making a respectful gesture, Frederico asks who this man was and why he was attacking him. The guy acknowledges that Fred was very strong and said he lived up to his reputation, and said he was worthy of being a martial arts master. At that moment, Alice appears calling for her uncle. Fred realized that this guy was part of the Yu family, and she was already all cranky, saying she had sent messages to Frederico, but he didn't respond, so she had to come in person to look for him. That's because he was with his sick sister and ended up getting into trouble with that chubby guy at the mall. Later, he sat down to have a chai and they talked. And Frederico said that the Tai Chi hands of that man were very powerful. Alice says that it was to be expected, as her uncle is one of the greatest masters of the Yu family, and he was even considered one of the strongest guys in the city. The girl's uncle asks if, by any chance, Fred knows the identity of Lise. Of course, our protagonist knew that she was a super important girl, since she was the eldest daughter of the boss. However, her uncle was very serious and even ends up slamming the glass on the table. He even tells his niece to go cut some fruit for them. However, he wanted to leave her alone in the kitchen so he could talk to Fred. And that's exactly what she does, going to the kitchen. The girl's uncle speaks in a very serious way to Fred that they could never be boyfriend and girlfriend. Upon hearing those words from the uncle, he starts spitting out the juice, and even apologizes, saying those words were very sudden and ended up scaring him. While wiping himself, the guy reinforces again, saying that Frederico should understand those words. They couldn't be together, and that was for the good of the girl, since she was destined to marry someone from the Vangue family. Our hero remembers very well that this Vangue family was no good. However, the girl's uncle keeps saying that, although Fred defeated the Zangui family, he could not compare to the suitor from the Vangue family, that they were very powerful. If by any chance the Yu family wanted to reach an even higher level, they should ally with this other family. However, Fred knew very well that this was not what Alice wanted, and asked her uncle if, by any chance, he had asked the girl's opinion. In response, the guy says that people at their level have family interests above all, but the most important thing of all would be Alice's happiness. That's what mattered. The guy gets so angry that he breaks the glass, and said he wouldn't argue with Fred anymore, he just came to deliver that notice, and that he should stay away from the girl. In a somewhat bold way, Frederico asks what would happen if he didn't agree. Her uncle already gets angry, saying he's not going to go easy on the boy just because he's young. Alice appears and asks why her uncle was so angry, and he already gets up saying they finished talking with Frederico and they should leave. The girl always felt happy when she was near our hero, so that's why she kept saying she didn't want to leave now. To try to calm things down, he says he has some things to do and that he will meet her later. The girl knew exactly what her uncle came to do, and she couldn't solve anything about it. And she even gets sad, asking if he's really going to leave now. However, in a rather cheerful way, he tells her not to be sad because he'll be back soon. He won't leave her waiting too long. The girl's uncle realized that this guy, besides being smart, was very powerful and that he should be careful with him. So Alice and her uncle end up saying goodbye, and our protagonist tells her to take care. He knew that even within the Yu family, they cared much more about power and influence. But now he should focus on saving his sick sister, since she was under that Inguyang cultivation curse. He slept the whole night and woke up in good spirits. He changes clothes and wonders if, by any chance, the sick sister was already ready. They were going on a trip looking for a medicinal snake venom to be able to heal her cultivation. The neighbors even complained, saying that Fred was making noise early in the morning. Outside, it was him and his friend calling him Martial Uncle. The protagonist tells him not to keep calling him Uncle, since it sounded like he was an old man. In response, the guy says that the master and the sick sister were already at the airport waiting for him, and there was still a little secret waiting for our hero. However, the guy wasn't going to say what that secret was. He'd have to get to the airport to find out what it was, and that way they head over there. The scene changes to the airport terminal in the city of Jiangsu. He thanks his colleague for the ride, and ends up spotting Julia from afar and starts shouting her name. The girl noticed that Fred had brought all the preparations in his backpack, and even says she's impressed because he seems much more committed than she thought. So he already gets all excited, telling them to head out quickly, but Julia had something she wanted to show him. She said she received a sealing talisman that her master had given her, and that she could only give it to Fred as a gift once he had done certain things. However, since she didn't know about her health condition, she goes ahead and gives him the seal. Fred knew very well what it meant to see those seals, and asked Julia if by chance she knows too. When the masters gave her this magic seal, they didn't say anything. They just said it would be important for Fred. And now begins a bombshell revelation, guys. Actually, Frederico already had the highest cultivation level when he was born. However, he was only able to use up to the 8th degree of strength. Julia is surprised, asking if he's currently at the peak of the true chi realm. He said yes, and said his masters nurtured his body with all kinds of celestial treasures and also earthly treasures so that he could withstand his power. However, the boy was born so strong that the masters created several seals to be able to store his power. He had already managed to break one of those barriers using the seal that the sixth sister gave, and this one was the second seal. Quite surprised, she asked what his maximum power level would be, since he's so strong at such a young age. In other words, he wouldn't know how to say, but in fact, he basically had unlimited power, and currently he was in the realm of Marmadu. To better understand, martial cultivation is divided into 6 realms, and reaching the peak of true chi allows someone to be called a master. The higher realms, like the soul crossing realm and the power transmutation realm, were the second stage of legend, and people who reached this level were considered immortal beings. If all 8 of Fred's layered seals are broken, he will be able to become a legendary guy, even at the immortal level. And when she thinks about it, she even freezes, and Fred keeps waving his hand in front of her face to see if she's awake. After meditating a bit, she says it was already time for them to leave. Fred tells Julia she can keep that sealing talisman and give it to him later. They wouldn't break the master's rules, and she ends up agreeing. She couldn't imagine that her younger brother was such a strong guy. That way they end up traveling. And they go to the province of Mial, which was near the 100,000 mountains, close to the southern border. Julia had already scheduled with the driver and guide to take them to the mountains. This gets him all excited, saying that the older sixth sister was very smart. However, he was feeling something strange. It was as if someone was spying on them. The sixth sister even asks what happened, and he says it was nothing, he just had the impression that someone was watching. And so he leaves the airport. Outside, a car ends up stopping right in front of them. The girl introduces herself, saying she will be the driver and guide since she had been hired, and Julia thanks her, saying she arrived right on time. And shamelessly, the driver gets all flirty with Fred, saying he was very handsome. Julia introduces him, saying he's her younger brother, and the driver keeps flirting with our protagonist. Without further delay, Julia tells everyone to get in the car because they needed to arrive soon. On the way, the driver wouldn't stop talking. She introduces herself, saying her name is Lin Lin, and even says she knows the mountains very well and will be a great guide. Julia was already getting annoyed because this girl wouldn't shut up, and that way they continue the trip. But as expected, she kept talking the entire ride. We see that there really were people following Fred, and the guy picks up the phone telling his master that Federico had already left the airport. On the other end of the line, the master says they shouldn't lose sight of Federico and to keep pursuing him. This was the young master who was interested in our hero. The girl who was with him keeps telling the guy not to get so stressed about work and to try to have fun with her. However, he was a jerk and ends up throwing the girl's cup on the ground. This was Chen Ruong Ming, and he was the 4th son of the powerful master of the Chen family. Our protagonist had eliminated someone from his family, so he wanted to get revenge on Fred. And meanwhile, that driver wouldn't shut up. She kept talking about how the mountains in that region worked and said it was a very dangerous place. Even Fred, who was usually polite, was already getting irritated. She was saying that these mountains have many dangerous animals, and that it's the place in China with the most poisonous snakes. The vegetation in this place was lush, but there were many tigers and boas. Since it was a sparsely inhabited area, these animals ended up reproducing very quickly. And along the way, the driver comments that it's kind of strange for the road to be full of cars. And when they look in the rearview mirror, there were some cars that seemed to be chasing them. Since this was a sparsely inhabited region, there shouldn't be that much car traffic. Those mobsters were following Fred. It looked like they wanted to settle the score with him. This guy was known as Black Claw and was one of the most dangerous mobsters in the city. The rookie kid was even scared because they really intended to eliminate Fred. And then they start speeding up, wanting to hit the white car. Before causing an accident, the guy keeps saying he won't give Fred a chance to escape, and slams into the poor driver's car. She already starts screaming in desperation, saying it's a robbery. She panics, begging someone to call an ambulance. But the panic was so intense she couldn't do anything properly, and even notices that there were other cars crashing from the other side. The girl thought it was just a robbery, but soon realized it was about mobsters, and the panic started growing even more. To everyone's misfortune, the mobsters stopped in front of them, forcing the driver to brake as well. The guy already gets out of the car and says that Federico had offended the young master of the Chen family, and that's why he was going to get beaten up. They were surrounded, and several guys with red bands on their heads got out. This red band gang was extremely well known in the city, and people were terrified of them. The driver says she knows these guys, and in other words, says they're screwed. However, Fred tells her to stay calm, and that he would take care of everything. He even asks who the boss of those guys is, and the girl gets super scared, asking if he doesn't know who they are. Looking through the window, Fred already realizes he's a bit stronger than the group's leader, so it would basically be a guaranteed victory. He opens the car door and tells the girls to stay hidden inside, because he would handle everything. There were about 20 to 30 mob henchmen outside, and the girl panics. Julia tells her to stay calm and count to 10, because that would be the time Federico needed to deal with the problem. Not understanding anything, the driver asks how come she thinks that boy is going to handle those mobsters. A little annoyed, Julia insists, telling her to just count to 10. The driver puts her hand on her face and starts counting. And outside, our protagonist, also known as the background character Beater, was doing his job. Little by little, he started taking them down one by one. And the girl inside the car was counting, reaching number 4. To finish off the henchman even faster, our hero grabs a baseball bat and starts smashing all the thugs in the head. The driver had already counted to 10 and asked Julia if that did anything. And when she looks through the window, she sees that Fred finished off everyone, leaving only their leader standing. Confidently, Federico asks who sent them. All bruised, the Black Claw's leader says it was actually the master of the Chen family. However, Federico doesn't know anyone from that family and asks why they were after him. To show he was telling the truth, the criminal said he didn't know the reason. He only followed orders. Fred says that if he doesn't speak up, he'll take him down. And humbling himself, the guy swears he doesn't know anything. He didn't even know the reason, he just followed orders and did what he was told. It seemed like this guy wasn't lying. He was just a henchman. And that's why our protagonist spared his life. And even tells the guy to get out of his sight. Desperate, the guy thanks him and says that from now on, he'll value life more. Before anything else, Fred tells him to wait. He should pay for the damages caused to the driver's car. Then he comes back with a pile of money and offers it to the girl. It would be dangerous to accept money from mobsters, so she keeps refusing. However, Julia says she should just accept it, because it's compensation. And without thinking twice, the guide ends up accepting it. Before getting in the car, Federico tells the mobsters to disappear and never mess with him again. Lin gets all excited, since the amount she received was even more than the price of her car. He asks if the car is still working so they can continue the trip, and the driver says yes. This car, although a bit old, was very tough, and so they take off from that place. The girl even says it was amazing that Federico managed to deal with those mobsters alone, and to see if that girl would shut up, Julia says that Federico is actually a super powerful mobster, known as Black Dragon the Black. Not even Fred could believe his sister was telling a lie like that. And the driver decides to keep her mouth shut. He even coughs a bit, trying to play it off, and asks Julia if that was really necessary. And we see that it worked, because the driver didn't say anything else during the trip, only that could make that annoying driver stay quiet. This was useful for Fred to figure out who was behind the attacks. It was probably the Chen family, and now he needed to figure out why they were doing this. Julia asks if he's sure it's the Chen family, and he says that mobster mentioned the name of that family. If they really are the ones behind the attacks, Julia already has an idea why. The Chen family is ranked 4th among the 10 great families in the city of Yangzhou, but Fred says he didn't get involved with that family, so there was no reason for them to be chasing him. However, what he didn't know is that the matriarch of the Chen family is the younger sister of the head of the Zhang family. And since our protagonist went there and wiped them all out, they were most likely seeking revenge on Fred. Besides having destroyed the Zhang family, Fred crushed the Chen family's hopes of becoming one of the top 3 most powerful. He asked why then the Chen family didn't send help when he went to destroy the Zhang family. That's because he was overestimating himself too much. In other words, nobody cared about Fred, that they didn't imagine he would pose a threat to the Zhang family. And when the Chen family found out about the destruction of their allied family, our protagonist had already handed over all the assets to Grandpa Yu, so they couldn't do anything. That meant they would keep chasing Federico, because now they believed he truly posed a threat. And their journey to the 100,000 mountains won't be as easy as they thought. Fred even says that he has many powerful techniques he hasn't shown yet, so he could protect himself and Julia. And so they arrive at a hotel on the mountain. The driver is terrified and says they finally arrived at the place, asking if they would like her to take the bags out of the trunk. And she even calls Fred Mr. Black Dragon King, and Julia giggles in the background. A little later, at night, the sixth sister is training her cultivation to see if she had finally overcome that curse. It seems like everything was going normally, and she was even managing to release a bit of her spiritual energy. However, in a brief moment, she felt a terrible pain. It was as if all her wing-yang cultivation was being destroyed when she forced the spiritual energy, and she even falls to the ground, complaining that she was in a lot of pain. And we see a flashback of a guy casting a curse, and it was exactly this monk who had cursed Julia. With a wicked smile, he says he was completing part of his revenge. Hold on, guys, because we're about to see why this guy placed a curse on Julia and why she's suffering so much. The young master of the Chen family was with this monk, and he was using the curse cast on Julia to track her. He was part of a sect that was an enemy of the Seven Sages sect. That's why he was combining his desire to get revenge on that sect with the desire of Master Chen to get revenge on Fred. The scene changes to the Chen family mansion. The family leader was talking to someone very important. The person there was the leader of the sword sect, and he had come to find out about the death of his brother. This guy's brother had died in the battle at the Zhang family's house, and it was that super powerful guy that our prota defeated. The head of the Chen family keeps saying that the one responsible for all of this is named Federico. He had gathered clues about how his brother had died, and ends up handing over a picture, saying that this boy who looks like Fred had defeated his brother in a very cruel way. That already leaves the sect master furious, saying that he needed to avenge his poor brother, and the guy also says that, before dying, the brother had all his cultivation destroyed, and that it was something Fred did just to cause pain. Obviously, this guy was lying just to influence the sect master, and he gets very angry, saying he needs to hunt down that boy. And to add fuel to the fire and make the guy even angrier, he keeps saying that Frederico had powerful and terrible techniques, and even asked that this swordmaster join his family to wipe out Frederico. Of course, he wouldn't let a relative, especially a brother, be killed in such an evil way. So, without a doubt, he would take revenge on Frederico. The head of the Chen family starts celebrating, saying he got a great ally. They needed to stop Frederico, since he was allied with the Yu family, and they imagined that if they let this boy live, their family would also be destroyed. He didn't just want to recover the Zhang family's assets, but also swallow the entire Yu family. Back at the hotel, Fred was commenting that the breakfast there was really tasty. Julia is happy that he liked it, but she seemed a bit worried. He was eating calmly, but noticed that she was feeling unwell, so he placed his hand on her wrist. The girl says she's feeling fine and that he didn't need to worry about her so much. In response, he says she looked weak and pale, and asks if she was on her days. She quickly pulls her hand away, and at that moment he realized that she had tried to use cultivation again. He gets mad at Julia, saying that if she kept trying to cultivate, it would only accelerate the curse process. She asks if he hadn't said that she had 2 more years to live, so she could try to cultivate. He had said that she would have 2 more years of life, but only if she didn't force cultivation. If she forced too much, she would only have a few more weeks of life. That already makes her desperate, asking, "What do you mean? I only have a few more weeks to live?" That's because the more she forced it, the more the curse would take root in her body. That's why they decide to go find this venomous snake to make the magic pill right away. The driver calls him Black Dragon King, and the people around them get scared, imagining that he's a mobster. The guy tells her not to call him by that nickname in front of others, because people might get the wrong idea. Already inside the car, she keeps saying that she's going to take them to the dangerous 100,000 mountains, where there are mythological beings. Julia says they're not going to that place. They're going even deeper into the mountains, to the area of venomous snakes. The driver gets a little scared because that region is even more dangerous than the one she thought they were going to. In response, Fred says that if she doesn't want to go, he'll take them there. She can drop them off on the road and they'll go on foot. He just needed her to stay there waiting for them to return. However, the guide says it's not a problem. Since she grew up in that place, she knows the mountains very well. And so, she ends up agreeing to take them there. She just needed him to pay an extra fee. In another car, there was a guy spying on our protagonist, calling the head of the Chen family. The young master ordered everyone to keep an eye out, and already started setting up a trap, going to those mountains to wait for the boy. It seems like these guys knew every step of our protagonist. He keeps saying he set up the perfect trap for Fred, and that he won't let him escape unpunished. He had gathered several fighters, and also that martial monk to beat Frederico up. Everyone shouts that they are ready and that they're going to beat up this boy. That way the young master heads there, because he wants to watch everything up close.